Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I came back from 3 weeks off the grid to find a steel gate blocking the only road to my cabin, installed by an HOA I never joined, run by a woman I barely knew. No warning, no right, just control. They picked the wrong mountain and the wrong man. I had just spent 3 weeks in the Montana backcountry guiding a group of retired combat vets down a brutal stretch of river called the Devil's Elbow. No cell service, no news, no contact with civilization, just the way I like it. That's why I built my cabin in the Rockies in the first place. 18 acres of pure freedom. No internet, no HOA, and definitely no people telling me what to do with my own land. So when I finally got back to the edge of civilization, truck loaded with gear, dog asleep in the passenger seat, beard a few inches heavier, all I wanted was to light a fire in my stone hearth, drink strong coffee on my porch, and remind myself why. I tolerate the rest of the world in short bursts only. But as I rounded the final bend toward my turnoff, a narrow gravel road that's technically been public access since the early 80s, I hit the brakes hard. There it was, a dam barrier. Big metal gate painted forest green, mounted into concrete footings, and flanked by a prefabricated guard booth like something out of a suburban security fantasy. A freshly planted sign stood proud beside it in all caps. Pine Trail Watch HOA, private road, residents only, trespassers will be prosecuted. The sign wasn't crooked, the dirt around the posts was still loose. This thing was new, real new. I rolled my window down, already feeling my pulse rise. A man stepped out of the booth wearing a navy windbreaker with an embroidered logo that read PTW Security. No badge, no gun, just a clipboard and a posture that screamed middle management cosplayer. He stepped in front of my truck like he was guarding a military base. Sir, this road is restricted to HOA members and approved guests. Do you have a pass? I stared at him for a long moment. I've owned the cabin at the end of this road for over a decade. This is my access road. He adjusted his sunglasses. All residents must now register with the Pine Trail Watch Homeowners Association for road use. You're not on the list. I leaned out the window, trying to keep my voice level. Listen carefully. My land is not part of any HOA. I have county-verified, notarized documentation. I don't pay dues, I don't vote, and I don't answer to Pine Trail Watch or Karen freaking Burgess. So move your little gate. He didn't budge. You'll need to contact the HOA board to resolve this. I'm not authorized to let unregistered parties through. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I backed up my truck, parked on the shoulder, and walked up to the gate on foot. The man started to say something, but I cut him off with a raised hand. I took out my phone and started recording. "This is Michael Sloan," I said into the camera. "The road to my property has been illegally blocked by a private security booth and gate installed by a homeowners association I do not belong to. I've been denied access to my own home." The security guy stepped back inside the booth and shut the sliding window. I drove back to the last bit of town with a signal and called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher was polite but non-committal. An hour later, a deputy met me at the base of the road. Guy was maybe late 20s. New badge, new boots, the kind of deputy who still thinks he's going to change the system from the inside. He listened to my story, nodded a lot, then said, "Technically, this is a civil issue, sir. I can't make them remove the gate without a court order. Your best option is to take it up with the HOA directly or file a complaint through the county. You're telling me someone can block off access to my own land with a Home Depot gate, and you're calling it a civil issue?" The deputy shifted on his heels. "If you had a court order or emergency injunction, maybe. But until then, this is a dispute between private parties." He gave me the HOA president's name and number for reference, like I needed it. Karen Burgess, 61, former municipal compliance officer, currently the self-appointed queen of the hills. I'd met her once. That was enough. I called her right there. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was all sugar. "Well, hello, Mr. Sloan. I trust you're back from your wilderness adventures. You've put a gate across the only road to my house, Karen." "Yes," she said brightly. "We've decided it was time to formalize usage and control traffic to maintain our community standards. The HOA board voted to secure the trail. There is no we in this. I'm not part of your HOA. Well," she purred, "that's the interesting part. You see, we had our legal counsel redraw the community access map, and the road now falls within our recreational zone. You may not be a dues-paying member, but you still benefit from our infrastructure. Therefore, it's only fair. I hung up. I don't hang up on people often, but when someone tries to gaslight you about the land your grandfather walked in combat boots before you were born, there's only one correct response. I drove back down to town, booked a motel for the night, and opened my old leather-bound folder of land documents, deeds, surveys, county records, right-of-way maps dating back to 1982. I laid them out across the motel table like cards before a duel. I'd fought off bears, storms, and once a drunk tourist with a hunting knife. This was going to be fun. I didn't waste time the next morning. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in the office of Rachel Hahn, my property lawyer for the past 5 years. She wasn't cheap, but she was surgical. Ex-prosecutor, no patience for bullshit, and she once won a case against a mining company that tried to rezone half a mountain under a fake environmental foundation. When she looked over my documents with that deadpan expression of hers and then flipped to the printouts of the new HOA map I pulled from their website, she let out a short, humorless laugh. "Well," she said, "this is either stupidity or fraud. Possibly both." We spent the morning assembling the legal equivalent of a loaded shotgun. My original deed with attached 1982 right-of-way declaration, the notarized letter from the previous landowners opting out of any future collective easements, and the certified county map showing my property sitting well outside the HOA boundary. Rachel filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against Pine Trail Watch HOA, specifically to remove any obstruction of access to my parcel via the road. We'd get a hearing in 72 hours, maybe less. Then I went shopping. 4 motion-activated trail cameras, 2 battery-powered spy cams, solar-powered cellular uplink for night surveillance. My land sits on a natural incline with clear lines of sight across the lower road. I knew exactly where to mount the cameras, high up in the trees, angled slightly down so the security shack and passing vehicles would be in perfect frame. I installed all 6 over the next afternoon, dressed in camo, moving quiet, like I was back teaching stealth navigation in Idaho. I didn't have to wait long. The very next morning, I got the first ping from the solar uplink. Footage showed the same guard stopping an SUV with a couple inside, looked like tourists. The man handed over cash, and the guard opened the gate. I watched 3 more videos like that by lunch. All of them had one thing in common: non-HOA vehicles, clearly not residents, clearly being charged access fees. I drove back into town and went straight to the county roads office. I'd been there before when I filed for well permits. I showed the footage to a clerk, a guy named Stewart, who'd been working there since the Bush administration. His eyebrows nearly left his forehead. "They're charging people to use a county access corridor." "Exactly," I said. "And using that money to fund a private barrier on public easement." He called in a supervisor, then someone from the land management division. Then they called the Office of Infrastructure Compliance, which I didn't even know existed until that moment. By the end of the meeting, I'd handed over full copies of my footage, sworn a complaint, and walked out with 2 business cards and a promise that field investigators would be on site within the week. Meanwhile, I had Rachel draft a cease and desist letter demanding immediate removal of all barriers and a formal apology. We sent it by certified mail, email, and dropped a hard copy straight into the HOA office mailbox. That same evening, the cameras picked up a different scene: the security guard locking the gate, then driving off in a black pickup. No more cash transactions, no patrols. The booth lights went dark. I knew better than to celebrate. The next day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I picked up. "Mr. Sloan," said the voice. Polite, nasal, reeking of someone who uses the word "whereas" in everyday conversation. "This is Richard Smoltz, General Counsel for the Pine Trail Watch HOA. We've received your letter and consider it without merit. Our position remains that the road now falls under HOA jurisdiction as part of a reclassified recreational zone ratified by our internal vote and recorded in our updated bylaws. You do realize internal votes don't overwrite county land use designations, right? Our legal team disagrees. You're welcome to challenge it in court. I'm already doing that," I said. "Oh, and your security team? Caught on camera extorting cash from tourists. County Roads is very interested." There was a pause. Then a carefully measured, "We look forward to resolving this matter professionally." I hung up. By sunset, I'd installed 2 more cameras near my cabin gate, just in case. That night, as I sat in the motel nursing a beer and listening to coyotes howl somewhere out in the hills, I got a notification, another video. Karen herself standing in the dark near the security booth, talking to someone. She wasn't smiling this time. I zoomed in, enhanced the audio. "He's digging. Get rid of anything. Receipts. Guest log. All of it. That'll do." I didn't sleep much the night after catching Karen on camera whispering about destroying evidence. Something about hearing her voice in the dark, calm and surgical like she was ordering takeout instead of plotting obstruction of justice, had a way of crawling under my skin. I forwarded the clip to Rachel immediately, time-stamped, labeled, backed up on 3 drives. Then I stared at the ceiling for another hour, wondering what else she'd buried out there in the woods. By morning, I wasn't wondering anymore. I drove back up to the roadblock just to see if anything had changed. The guard shack was still empty, the lights off, but now a freshly laminated sign was taped to the gate in place of the old wooden one. It read, "Temporary access restricted due to maintenance and safety hazards. Pine Trail Watch HOA." Same authoritarian tone, same fake legal authority. Only this time, no one was around to bark it out. But when I looked down at the base of the gate, I noticed something that made me stop cold. A thin trench had been dug into the gravel and partially covered, fresh soil, barely tamped down. I knelt and brushed it aside. Underneath, a bundle of new cables ran across the road. Power, data, possibly even irrigation. Someone had used the maintenance excuse to trench in new utilities across the public easement. That meant only one thing: escalation. Rachel called me just as I was brushing the dirt off my jeans. She made her move, she said. Filed a lawsuit in county civil court. She's claiming you're illegally using HOA-maintained infrastructure, power lines, water lines, the road itself. Wants an injunction to force you to pay retroactive dues and comply with HOA standards. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I haul in my own water. Power comes from solar panels. And the road. That road's been public since Reagan was in office. Doesn't matter, Rachel replied. She's betting the court won't look closely. She's drowning the system in paper to delay your injunction. It's a distraction tactic. I was about to respond when another call buzzed in. I recognized the number. Calvin Ortega, one of the 2 part-time residents further up the mountain who'd lived there before Pine Trail Watch was even a concept. I answered. "Mike," he said without preamble, "you need to know. Karen's been going door to door, passing out letters. She's telling people you're a threat to community safety. Says you made violent threats, tried to sabotage the water system. She's trying to build a paper trail," I muttered. "Some of us know she's full of crap," he added, "but a few of the newer folks, they're nervous. She's got them thinking you're some kind of prepper psycho squatting on the hill." I exhaled slowly, rage buzzing low in my chest like a hornet nest. "Thanks, Cal. Keep your head down." That afternoon, I returned to my cabin the long way, off-road, cutting around the Eastern Ridge Trail using an old logging path I'd cleared years ago. As soon as I got in, I checked my off-grid water system. Flow was dead. The tank showed full, but no pressure. I traced the line down toward the HOA controlled pipe segment. That's when I found the break. A clean cut just inside the tree line, capped with a bright orange lockout valve bearing the HOA logo. They'd installed a physical shutoff on the feed line that ran along the shared boundary. No notice, no communication, just sabotage with a smile. I walked back uphill fuming and caught the glint of something above my property line, near the ridge facing my cabin. Another camera. This one wasn't mine. A little black box with a tiny blinking light bolted to a tree and aimed directly at my house. I followed the cable back through the underbrush to a junction box with an antenna pointing southeast, likely a cellular uplink, which meant that Karen, or someone working with her, was actively monitoring my property in real time. I took it down, disconnected the feed, bagged it for evidence. That night, I met Rachel in person for the first time in months. We laid out the full situation on her office table. Photos of the sabotaged pipe, the trench and unauthorized cables, dash video of the cash for passage scheme, audio of Karen ordering someone to destroy documents, the HOA camera pointed at my house, and finally the new lawsuit filed against me, including statements from 3 residents claiming I was aggressive, erratic, and threatening. Rachel didn't flinch. She just looked up at me and said, "Time to go on offense." We filed a counterclaim the next morning, adding counts of harassment, trespass, vandalism, illegal surveillance, and retaliation. Then Rachel did what she did best, subpoenaed everything. We requested full financials of Pine Trail Watch HOA for the last 3 years, communication logs between Karen and security personnel, minus HOA board meeting minutes past 12 months. Installation permits for any physical structures placed on or near county easement. Karen wanted war. I'd give her the kind that comes with exhibits, expert witnesses, and a permanent court record. She'd cut off my water. I was about to cut off her oxygen. The court date for the injunction came faster than expected. Karen must have thought her fake maps and intimidation tactics would buy her more time, but Rachel had pushed hard for expedited review. And we got it. 48 hours later, I was sitting in a wood-paneled courtroom in a suit I hadn't worn since my sister's second wedding, watching Karen Burgess act like she was accepting a humanitarian award. She showed up with 2 attorneys, one local, one imported from some Denver HOA specialist firm, and an attitude like she was the victim in all of this. Her hair was perfectly blown out, her glasses perched low on her nose, and her binder was packed with color-coded tabs. She walked past me without a glance, but I saw her give a quick smirk when the bailiff called the case number. Her team tried to delay the hearing, claimed they needed additional time to collect community records. Rachel stood up and said 5 words. "We have video of extortion." That changed the energy in the room. The judge, a middle-aged woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for zero tolerance toward petty procedural games, ordered the hearing to proceed. And proceed it did. Rachel opened by presenting our full exhibit list, the surveillance footage of cash exchanges at the gate, the audio of Karen instructing someone to destroy documents, the shutdown of the water line, the unauthorized surveillance camera aimed at my property, and a notarized declaration from Calvin Ortega stating that HOA letters had falsely accused me of criminal threats. Karen's face didn't twitch, but the corner of her attorney's mouth did. They knew they were in a tailspin. Karen's team tried to claim the road had been recently annexed into HOA jurisdiction through a community vote and reclassification of common areas. Rachel dropped a bomb. She'd obtained a signed letter from the County Department of Transportation, clearly stating that the road in question had never been transferred to private ownership, remained a public access route, and was listed on the county maintenance inventory. Then came the most satisfying moment I'd had in years. The judge turned to Karen's side and asked, "On what authority did the HOA install a gate, collect tolls, and trench utilities across a county easement?" Karen's lawyer stammered something about internal governance and community improvement. The judge was unimpressed. "The court hereby grants the temporary injunction," she ruled. "The Pine Trail Watch HOA is to immediately remove any and all obstructions on the access road within 72 hours. Furthermore, any future restriction of access to Mr. Sloan's property, physical or otherwise, will be considered a violation of this court order and subject to contempt proceedings." Karen stood like someone had just thrown a drink in her face. No more smirk, no more binder confidence. We walked out of the courthouse with the papers in hand, and within an hour, Rachel had served the injunction to the HOA office in town. But I knew Karen wouldn't go down that easy. Her ego wouldn't allow her to obey a court ruling without bleeding first. That night, I got a text from Calvin. It was a photo taken from his porch. Karen standing by the guard booth with a contractor crew and a clipboard, pointing aggressively at the gate. She was trying to argue with them, probably to stall the takedown. But Rachel had already faxed the order directly to the contractor's office and the county road supervisor. The next morning, I drove up the hill and watched them rip it all out. The booth went first, then the cables. The gate itself came down in one glorious moment when a backhoe twisted the steel frame like a pretzel and tossed it to the side. A deputy watched the whole thing from his cruiser, arms crossed, enjoying the show just as much as I was. I parked near the now clear trail and walked up the ridge. No more obstruction, just trees, wind, and the crunch of my boots on gravel. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until that moment. It was like a fog had lifted. I breathed in sharp mountain air and felt something close to peace. But the moment didn't last long. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Another motion from Karen's legal team. This time, it wasn't about the road. She was filing a civil claim for damages to HOA property, unlawful interference with association activities, and defamation of character. She was also personally accusing me of stalking and unauthorized surveillance. Rachel skimmed the filing and raised an eyebrow. She's spinning out. She's going nuclear. Good, Rachel said, reaching for her coffee. So are we. We added new claims to our countersuit, specifically criminal trespass for HOA employees entering my land to install the surveillance camera, wire fraud if we could prove HOA dues were misused to pay for Karen's personal expenses, false statements tied to her letters accusing me of violent behavior, and finally, unlicensed toll operation on a public roadway. Rachel also filed discovery motions to dig into HOA finances, emails, and Karen's personal spending over the last 24 months. If Karen thought she could outmaneuver us with theatrics, she'd soon learn what it felt like to have the law peel you open layer by layer. We weren't just going to win. We were going to audit her into the Stone Age. I'll never forget the moment we got the first batch of subpoenaed HOA financial records. Rachel dropped them on her office table like a slab of meat, 2 thick binders, each stuffed with transaction logs, reimbursements, credit card statements, and a handful of scanned receipts that looked like they'd been hastily run through a dusty scanner in someone's garage. They were banking on us being too overwhelmed or too bored to comb through them all. Unfortunately for them, Rachel had an intern named Jordan, and Jordan was a forensic accounting grad student with the enthusiasm of a bloodhound on espresso. By the end of the week, we had more than a dozen red flags marked with sticky notes. There were airfare charges to Las Vegas, 3 separate trips always billed to the HOA Leadership Retreat Fund. There were restaurant receipts from high-end steakhouses in Denver tagged as community outreach. There was even a payment to a yoga retreat in Sedona under mental health development. But the worst wasn't what Karen was spending the HOA's money on. It was who she was paying. Several line items went to a company called Mountain Consult and Design for things like road maintenance planning and fence assessments. A quick search showed the company was registered to Lyle Burgess, Karen's brother, who lived 2 towns over, and ran a landscaping business out of his backyard. No business license, no tax filings, just a P.O. box and a PayPal account. Classic nepotistic grift. We bundled it all into a new filing and amended the complaint with accusations of embezzlement, self-dealing, and breach of fiduciary duty. The judge approved an accelerated hearing schedule and froze HOA discretionary funds until the court could determine misuse. That meant Karen's little kingdom just lost its treasury. Her lawyer tried to argue that the freeze would cripple community operations. Rachel fired back. Better crippled than corrupt. The local news got wind of the story after the hearing. Someone from the courthouse, probably a bored clerk with a conscience, leaked the filing to a reporter. 2 days later, the headline hit the regional paper, HOA president accused of misusing funds, blocking access to private property. It didn't take long before neighbors started peeling off. Calvin called me that night and said a petition had started circulating among HOA members to force a recall vote. It's growing fast, he said. People feel duped. Even her old supporters are jumping ship. The next morning, I was woken by the sound of a truck in my driveway. I grabbed a jacket and stepped outside to find a local delivery guy unloading a large box from his flatbed. He handed me a clipboard and said, "This one's from your lawyer." Inside the box, a full printed copy of HOA records with annotations, and taped to the top, a note in Rachel's handwriting, check page 117. Page 117 was a scanned email from Karen to the HOA board. It was sent 6 weeks before the roadblock went up. In it, she wrote, "If we pressure Sloan enough, he'll either cave or sell. That property is wasted on someone who refuses to integrate into our community. We'll make the road closure about safety. The county won't get involved. It was a smoking gun. Intent. In writing. With a timestamp. With witnesses." Rachel's response: she scheduled a press conference. I wasn't comfortable with cameras. I wasn't used to being the face of anything, let alone a public fight. But Rachel said something that stuck with me. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about everyone she's bullied, fined, extorted, and shut down. She's not just a bad neighbor. She's a civic parasite. So I stood in front of the county courthouse in a flannel shirt and hiking boots, flanked by Rachel and a small group of community members, and I told our story. I talked about the fake tolls, the broken water line, the illegal surveillance, the lies. I didn't get emotional. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid it out slow and steady, like I was explaining a wilderness survival scenario to a rookie hiker, because really, it wasn't that different. Karen had built a trap, and I'd learned how to chew through it. By nightfall, the story was being shared all over local Facebook groups. Former HOA board members began coming out of the woodwork with their own complaints. Anonymous tips started flooding Rachel's inbox. Someone even submitted a copy of a doctored map that had been used in HOA newsletters, where the boundary lines had been quietly shifted to include my property. It was traced back to Karen's home printer. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for fraud and document falsification within 2 weeks. We weren't just on the offensive anymore. We were deep into demolition. By the time the fraud hearing rolled around, Karen was shedding allies like a snake molting under floodlights. Her once loyal HOA board had fractured. Half of them resigned outright, the other half flipped and were now cooperating with the county investigation. One of them, a retired CPA named Linda Chalmers, even offered to testify as a whistleblower. She'd kept copies of original financial statements that didn't match the versions Karen submitted to the HOA members. Paper trails don't lie, and Linda had a stack of them. Rachel walked into court that morning like she was arriving at a gala. Her briefcase practically hummed with confidence. Karen, by contrast, looked like she'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. Gone was the tailored blazer and polished smirk. Today, she wore an ill-fitting gray cardigan, no makeup, and an expression that hovered somewhere between panic and denial. The hearing was brutal. First came the fraud claims. Rachel outlined the altered maps, the manipulated boundary lines, the forged signatures on the so-called vote that allegedly brought the road under HOA control. Then came the embezzlement trail, funds paid to her brother, the retreat charges, the phony consulting expenses, the spa trips under the guise of community wellness. Karen's lawyer objected to nearly every sentence Rachel spoke, but most of them were overruled. Then Linda took the stand. She was calm, professional, and devastatingly thorough. She explained how Karen routinely overrode board votes, redacted financial records before public meetings, and once threatened to fine her $100 if she asked too many questions. The courtroom was silent as Linda described how the HOA's emergency reserve fund, a $70,000 cushion, had been depleted in just under 6 months. For what? The judge asked. Linda glanced at Rachel, then held up a printed receipt. A custom-made chandelier, she said. $4,000. Karen's defense collapsed after that. The judge allowed all of Rachel's evidence into the record and ordered a forensic audit of HOA finances going back 5 years. That by itself was a bombshell, but Rachel wasn't done. She petitioned the court for personal liability to be extended to Karen on the basis of gross negligence and intentional misconduct. It was granted. Outside, a swarm of reporters waited. I kept my head down as we pushed through them. I didn't have anything to say. Not yet. Not until the full ruling came down. Meanwhile, Karen's world was shrinking. Her neighbors were holding emergency HOA meetings in borrowed church basements because the official office was shut down pending investigation. Her personal bank accounts were frozen. Her home, once a status symbol in the mountain community, was now under lien as the court assessed damages, and the final nail came when her own insurance company dropped her coverage, citing pending fraud litigation. But that didn't stop her from trying to claw back power. That same week, I returned to my cabin for the first time since the gate had been torn down. I'd brought some gear, tools, and a month's worth of dry food. I just wanted to hike, chop wood, breathe cold air, and not hear the words injunction or subpoena for a few days. But when I pulled up to the trailhead, I found something new. A temporary fence, not across the road, around my property. Orange plastic netting, like the kind you see at construction sites, and in the middle of it, staked into the dirt, was a laminated sign. Environmental Monitoring Area. Access Restricted, HOA Oversight Committee. I laughed, loud, alone. Then I took out my phone and filmed the whole thing. Back in town, Rachel reviewed the footage and sighed. "This is beyond contempt of court," she muttered. "It's full-blown derangement." She didn't just file a contempt motion. She called the State Environmental Board and reported the unauthorized use of regulatory signage. Turns out, using falsified environmental notices is a felony in Colorado. Within 48 hours, the state had a representative on site, cutting down the fake fencing and photographing the sign. Karen's signature was on the order to install it. It was in the HOA meeting minutes. Idiocy leaves fingerprints. Then the real kicker. While inspecting the area, the environmental agent found tampered water lines, a trench that had been half dug through the corner of my lot, leading back toward the HOA side. Someone had been preparing to reroute water again. This wasn't just harassment, this was sabotage. Rachel didn't hesitate. She filed for a protective injunction and a criminal complaint for vandalism and trespass, this time with Karen named directly, not the HOA, not a contractor. Her, personally. The sheriff himself served the notice. And just like that, Karen Burgess officially became a criminal defendant. It was only a matter of time now. And I wasn't going anywhere. The headlines didn't stop. If anything, they got louder, sharper, and more specific. Mountain HOA implodes in fraud scandal, read one. HOA president faces criminal charges over fake environmental closure, said another. Karen's mugshot hit the local news sites the next morning after her formal arraignment. Gray roots showing, eyes hollow, jaw clenched with rage she didn't get to control anymore. Meanwhile, the state audit team began its sweep of HOA records. They weren't just looking at the past year, they went back a full decade, cross-referencing every expenditure, signature, and permit filed by Pine Trail Watch. Every missing receipt, every backdated check, every questionable contractor was flagged. And guess what? Karen's mismanagement wasn't limited to me. There were at least 5 other homeowners in the area who'd been quietly harassed, fined, or denied access to amenities after refusing to vote the way Karen wanted. Rachel called it a pattern of weaponized policy enforcement. The state called it racketeering. As all this unfolded, my injunction against Karen was formally upheld. She was barred from coming within 500 feet of my property and prohibited from initiating any further HOA actions related to my land. But the cherry on top came when the judge issued a personal asset freeze. Not just her bank accounts, but her house, her SUV, and even her pension accounts were now locked pending restitution hearings. Karen tried to appeal, of course, claimed it was all a witch hunt by extremists. Her lawyer gave a weak statement about political motivations. Nobody bought it, especially not after the court released the footage from my trail cameras. There, clear as day, Karen standing beside 2 hired workers pointing to the trench on my land and saying, "I don't care what the records say. He doesn't belong here." The audio was grainy but damning. Her voice, her words, her orders. The county sheriff's office officially opened a criminal vandalism investigation, and I was listed as the primary victim. By now, Rachel was coordinating with 3 separate agencies: the county prosecutor's office, the state audit bureau, and a private law firm that specialized in HOA dissolution. And I was mostly staying quiet. I didn't need to gloat. Reality was doing that for me. But something unexpected happened one morning that made me pause. I got a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was careful, almost elegant. Inside, 3 sentences, in blue ink. Mr. Sloan, I want to apologize. I served on the HOA board for 2 years. I was afraid to speak up. I should have said something when she tried this with you. I'm sorry. B. I didn't know who B was, but it didn't matter. The wall was crumbling, brick by brick. A week later, HOA members gathered for an emergency vote on whether to dissolve Pine Trail Watch entirely. It wasn't even close. Out of 97 eligible voters, 83 voted yes. The organization was officially suspended pending liquidation and final accounting. All assets were to be frozen and sold off to settle debts, fines, and restitution orders. And every current officer, including Karen, was permanently barred from ever forming or leading another HOA in the state of Colorado. The lawyer managing the dissolution even requested a public accounting be posted online for transparency. It was brutal. In just 4 years, Karen had taken the HOA from a healthy 6-figure reserve to negative balance, all while inflating her own reimbursements and billing the community for first-class flights and dog grooming. Then came the final blow. The court ruled on my civil suit for damages, not just for the blocked road, but for emotional distress, financial harm, loss of business. I had to cancel 3 expeditions during the dispute, and damage to my property from the waterline sabotage. The judge ruled in my favor on every count, $470,000, to be paid by the HOA and Karen personally. She didn't have it, so the court moved to seize assets, her home, her car, her accounts, all put under receivership. And because of her pending criminal charges, she couldn't declare bankruptcy to avoid paying. I drove up to the cabin 2 days later. The air was crisp, the trail clean, and the ugly plastic fence was gone. All that remained was a battered, sun-faded sign half buried in the dirt that said, HOA access only. I pulled it out, snapped it in two, and tossed it in the back of my truck. Peace. At last. It was early October when I saw her again. I was driving back from the county recorder's office with a folder full of updated maps, legal certifications, and a freshly notarized declaration of non-HOA jurisdiction for my 18-acre plot. Everything was locked down. Bulletproof. The road? Now officially marked as a county-maintained access easement, unchallengeable and permanent. I stopped for gas in town and pulled into the Walmart parking lot to grab some canned fuel for my camp stove. That's when I saw the RV. A battered, dented trailer from the early 90s, sun-faded, and parked at the edge of the lot behind the garden center. It was partially covered by a tarp, duct-taped in places, sagging in others. The rear bumper hung by one bolt, and beside it, sitting on a folding plastic lawn chair, was Karen. She looked small, smaller than I remembered. Her once dictatorial posture had collapsed into a hunched, jittery frame. She wore oversized sunglasses, though it was cloudy out, and she smoked cheap menthols with a shaking hand. A cardboard sign leaned against the trailer, donations for legal fees unjustly targeted. A second sign tucked halfway under the wheel read, former HOA president, ask me why I fought back. I didn't ask. I didn't even get out of the truck. I just watched her for a moment, watched her fumble with her cigarette, glance around nervously at passing cars, and mutter something under her breath like a person rehearsing a story they no longer believe in. Then I drove off. Back at the cabin, the air smelled like dry pine and wood smoke. I parked the truck beside the newly resealed trailhead and walked the perimeter of my property. No signs, no fences, no cameras watching me from across the ravine. Just mountains, solitude, and the kind of silence you can only earn. I spent the next few days off-grid, chopping firewood, repairing an old footbridge over the creek, reading an actual book by lantern light instead of scrolling through legal filings by phone screen. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up bracing for a fight. On the last evening, I installed the new sign I'd ordered, metal powder-coated, bolted into a cedar post I carved myself. Private mountain access road not subject to HOA controlled trespassing equals prosecution. Beneath that, just for good measure, I added a smaller plaque. Established right-of-way, county certified ref, case number 2025-CV-3814. It wasn't for Karen. It wasn't even for the next would-be suburban tyrant with a clipboard and a self-issued badge. It was for me. A line in the gravel that wouldn't be crossed again. Word spread quickly after that. Some of the former HOA members stopped by just to shake my hand. One woman, Janet, I think, brought me a tin of lemon bars and said, "You did what we were all too scared to do." Another guy offered me a bottle of whiskey with a post-it that read, "To the man who actually won." I didn't throw a party. I didn't post about it. I just went back to what I'd always wanted, a quiet life, far from anyone who thought control was more important than respect. But sometimes at night, when the wind carried just right, I'd remember how it all began. One gate, one arrogant woman, one road that wasn't hers, and how now, finally, none of it was hers anymore.